So again, nice to see everybody. I'm Denise Ellsworth with the Ohio State University Department of Entomology and OSU Extension, where I coordinate pollinator education. So I'm happy to see everybody here today for the Ask a Bumblebee data collector training. Nice to have everybody here. We had about 1,000 people sign up, so lots of interest in Ask a Bumblebee. So just to bring your attention to the Ask a Bumblebee website, there's a quick link to get you there. It's the go.osu.edu/askabumble. And I'll bet somebody can do that for me. Go ahead and put that into the chat box, but you have to put the http://go.osu.edu/askabumble. If you don't get that front part, it's not a live link. So somebody put that in the chat box, and then you can click on that link. You'll be on the website. You'll see where the forms are. You can subscribe to that website and get Jenan's update. And so you'll want to make sure that that link is handy. So at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Jenan El-Hifnawi, who is the coordinator of the Bumblebee Ask a Bumblebee survey, and Sam Droege, both from the USGS BIML Inventory and Monitoring Lab. And guys, take it over. We're really excited to learn more about this survey, see if we're observing correctly, and help learn what bumblebees like to eat.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you too for putting up the Ask a Bumblebee website. It's you did it far faster than we could ever do that, internally, and it's already being scraped and found by people. So great job, and thanks again for coming back to host this and give people a training. So my job here is just to introduce Jenan. I've got 2 points I would like to make before I do that. One is that when we think about bumblebees and the issues that surround them, there's some things that we can't do anything about, which are basically the disease issues that were brought over from Europe that they are dealing with. But to ameliorate that, similar, like if you are sick, do you want to eat good food or do you want to eat junky food, right? So the solution that we all can control is providing bumblebees with better food. So one of the questions, though, is what is that food? And so Jenan will talk about a way in which we divine what are the best flowers to present to bumblebees, and also which ones they really don't use at all. So the magical new part of this is that we're also quantifying what's not used by bumblebees, because there's a lot of sort of mixed messages out there. Are dandelions good or are they not? What about yarrow? I've got black-eyed Susans. Is that the best thing to plant? So with your help, what we plan to do is to create that information, make it publicly available, and disseminate it. And there are a million ways to cut those data back into all kinds of informative things, some of which we'll do in a preliminary set of reports, and you'll see that, and others which, fancy people with fancy computers will do fancy papers that ultimately will also help us too. I'll also point out that while not the primary goal, we're also doing bumblebee counts. So we'll have some idea on where they're common, where they're not common, when they are most common during the year, what's the hiatus period. So right now we're in a hiatus. So the queens have come out, did some mad scramble of foraging on some interesting plants, by the way, which we'll let you know about afterwards. And now we're not seeing a whole lot of activity, only a first couple of workers as the queens are hunkering down, fostering their brood. And then more during the year, and then it will taper off. I said I was just going to do 2 simple introductions, but now look at me talking about too many things already. So my second point is that it's rare and almost unheard of that citizens without a whole lot of training, and Denise does that for her groups in Ohio, but can directly help with some kind of scientific endeavor that has to do with conservation of bees. And this is a case. So there's really only thing that needs to be done, and Jenan will emphasize this, is differentiating carpenter bees from bumblebees. Later, if you can, learning more about the bumblebee species, that would be great. But many times, even people like myself who do know how to identify them all can't see them well enough, and they still become bumblebee species. And it turns out they're so picky that just the broad sense of where the bumblebees are are great. So this is something that anyone can do. How great is it that we really want you to go to gardens and public spaces that have lots of flowers, the nicest environments, and you get to choose where to go. And that's the scientific high road. So it's really, really, you have no excuse not to do this. It's just really fun and really supportive. And if you don't collect it, then, sadly, we won't have information from your part of the country and your flowers that you see. So now I'm really going to stop and let Jenan take over. And I just want to say that it's been really lovely working with Jenan. She has primarily done almost the entire program, put together the material, followed up. She's your person who's corresponding with you. She's shouldered a lot of responsibility while finishing up her school. I'm going to not embarrass her a whole lot more, but I really savor working with her over the next year while we process this information. So with that, I'm going to actually set her up by sharing. I'm going to try and monitor the chat if I can get on another computer here, but I'm going to share and I'm going to open the screen here. Oops.
So Sam, I'm going to launch our poll. So folks, we have 2 poll questions that should have popped up for you. Who's active right now in your garden or area? So are you seeing carpenter bees, queen bumbles, workers, or none of the above? And then have you already signed up to participate? So hopefully, yeah, I can see some people are starting to answer that. So we'll give that just a second. And then Sam, when you are on the other computer, you'll need to message me, or I think you have my cell, text me so I can make you a, so no, you'll be able to answer the questions. Never mind. You don't need special access. So.
Okay. I'm still me on the other computer, it turns out.
Okay. That's always good when you're you. So thanks, guys.
This is really interesting.
What, are you having a problem?
This poll.
Oh.
Yeah, so where I am in Northeast Ohio, I'm still seeing a few queens, but I haven't seen any workers yet. So I know, we have folks from all over. So a lot of you, even from Southern Ohio, are already seeing workers. But it's nice to see what else is going on. Oh, and then it looks like lots of people are signed up already to collect data. And some have even submitted it, 2%. Okay, just another minute and then we'll end the poll. So if you want to click on that. And so I'm surprised I haven't seen many carpenter bees this year. Just haven't been in the right places. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that. And then Jenan, all yours.
Okay. All right. So, hi, everybody. I'm Jenan, as Sam so nicely introduced. That was very generous. But I'm so excited to be here working with Sam and for Denise to have put this amazing opportunity together to share my project with you all. I really think that it is such a fun survey. And as Sam was saying, it's really easy. You can do it anywhere. And yeah, I think you all would really enjoy it. And I hope that you decide to participate. So this is the Ask a Bumblebee project. And what we are trying to answer is bumblebee floral preference. So we are interested in what flowers bumblebees like the most. And so we're planning to answer this question by focusing on collecting as much data as we can. So we're really focusing on making the survey accessible to everybody. So there's almost no requirements. All you need is a phone with a free app, Seek by iNaturalist. And we just use Seek to identify flowers. So you don't need to know any floral identification to participate. But if you do know floral identification and don't want to use the Seek app, that's also an option. So even if you don't have a phone, there are some ways around that, which I'll get into at the end. And then you also need to be able to tell a bumblebee from a carpenter bee from all the other flying things. But that is pretty doable. And we have resources that I think anybody could learn to do that in under 10 minutes. So now that we know what we're doing, let's get into how to actually do a survey. So first, you start by picking an area. And as Sam was kind of getting at, this is one of the most exciting things about this survey, in my opinion, is you can do it anywhere you want. So as long as you expect there to be bees, it's a good place to survey. It can be completely urban. Like I've done some surveys in Washington, D.C., just in potted plants. It can be all, planted non-natives if you want, or it could be, just walking through the woods, all native plants, whatever you want. And actually the best areas are places where the bees have the most options to pick from, because then we can really see if this is their last resort or if it's actually their favorite plant of the 20 other options. So if you have, a really diverse garden, or you could even go to botanical gardens or parks that are planted, and you can get really amazing data in these beautiful places that are fun to walk around. So once you pick your area, you really just walk for 30 minutes. And there's no transects or area measurements. So it's really user-friendly, and you don't need to really follow any trails or anything. You can just wander around wherever you feel like. So if you're walking on a trail and you see a big patch of flowers with a bunch of bees, you could totally walk off the trail and go over to the bees, which is pretty unique for a scientific project, because, oftentimes you would have a random GPS location drop you on the side of a highway or something, and we're not going to do that to you. You can go wherever you want. So as you're walking, you just want to record every single blooming flower species that you pass. And this is also a way that we're kind of unique from other surveys, is that oftentimes you just look at the flowers that the bees are on, but we actually want pictures of every single blooming flower species that you pass. So anytime you encounter a new flower species, you take a picture, you write the name of the flower on your data sheet, and then you can keep surveying. So as you're recording these flowers, you obviously want to be looking out for bees. So you just want to tally any bumblebees or carpenter bees that you see visit the flowers. And I have a picture of the data sheet at the end, which I'll show you how to actually do that, but it's super simple and you could, I'm sure, figure it out without an explanation. But once you're done with your 30-minute walk, which typically it ends up being a little bit more than 30 minutes because we want 30 minutes of bee observational time. So you should extend your survey to accommodate time that you spent using Seek to identify plants or writing on your data sheet or other things that aren't looking for bees. So my average survey takes me about 40 minutes maybe. So once you're done with that, you want to estimate floral abundance and distribution. And this is still super simple and really just a rough estimation, but that can feel a little bit uncomfortable for people sometimes because it is not an exact thing. We know that you are just estimating based off memory. So there's definitely some wiggle room in these results, and people are not expected to exactly get these rankings and number of lots right, which sometimes doesn't sit well with some very scientific-minded people, but we just have to accept the lack of exact information, and it still can totally work because we'll have so much data that everything will kind of even out. So I'll explain the floral abundance and distribution measures a bit more now because this is kind of what people tend to get the most hung up on. So we have two measures, floral rank and number of lots. Floral rank is, in my opinion, more intuitive because it really is just if you were to walk into an area, you're thinking, which flower is there the most of? The reason we can't actually just say which flower is there the most of is because every flower is so different. So you'll have something like a sunflower, which a single head is hundreds of florets. So if you're saying which flowers are the most of, there's all these questions of how to count how many flowers are in each different flower. So to avoid this, we just try to think of the area covered in bloom. So the number one ranked plant in your survey is the plant that has the greatest surface area of blooms. And another way you could think about that is if you were to take all the blooms of a species and flatten them out, which species would cover the greatest area? And again, it really is just which flowers they're the most of, but we can't ask that simple question because there are these little flaws in that. So for distribution, we use number of lots, which this is sort of like imagining dividing your survey area into a grid of 25 equal area lots. And then you ask, how many of these lots does the flower species appear in? And this is what I really mean is an estimation and not exact. And we'd understand that from memory, you can't say, oh, there were white clovers in exactly 18 out of 25 lots, because you're not drawing any lines. This is all just from memory. Really what you're doing is you're walking, you're saying, oh, there was clover in the majority of my survey area. So I think that was probably somewhere between 15 to 20 lots, and I'll call it 17. And then the alternative to that would be if you have, a big cherry tree or shrub, you'll have all these flowers, but it'll just be in one lot because they're concentrated. So it's not that we really need to get, white clovers in exactly 17 lots, but we see that these big things that have 1 or 2 lots are really concentrated, and the higher number of lots are really spread apart. So to kind of walk through this, I have a hypothetical survey path that is actually in our survey materials. We say it's Maya's survey. So this hypothetical person, Maya, takes a day off work or leaves in her lunch break and comes to start a survey here. She walks along this black line on this trail, but then sees these thistles over here. So she walks off the trail to the thistles and then goes back on her trail to finish the survey at this white dot. So this black line is your survey path. And this image is sort of like the information that you would have in your memory of your walk. You don't have any grid lines. You don't have the boundaries of your survey area. It just is, where you walked and roughly where the flowers were. And the following slides, I have drawn out what the lots look like, but I really want to emphasize that we don't expect anybody to make diagrams or to know lot boundaries. We're just looking for you to estimate, is this distributed? Is this concentrated in one area? So I'll kind of walk through that process with these 4 flowers. So Maya saw goldenrod, white clover, ashy sunflower, and thistles on her survey. And you can see that the goldenrod, the bigger these symbols are, it kind of is more flowers, more abundance. So you can see there's some big patches of goldenrod all across the survey area. It's not in every place. There's some spaces without it, but it's pretty spread apart. So I'm going to say that's in the majority of the lots. Well, first I'll start. It is clearly the most abundant flower to me. So I will give that a rank of number 1. White clover kind of looks the least abundant to me, so that will get the lowest rank, but the least abundant flower is the highest number because the most abundant flower is number 1 rank. Sometimes people will flip that scale, which makes sense. So I would say goldenrod is the most abundant. Between the thistles and the sunflower, I'm kind of having a hard time telling, but that's a great thing about the floral rank is you can have ties. So I would just say goldenrod is number 1 because it's most abundant, and these 2 are kind of similar abundance, and it's less than the goldenrod, but more than the white clover. So I'll call these tied for 2nd place. So goldenrod is 1, ashy sunflower and thistles are tied for 2 for floral rank, and the clover is 3 because it is the lowest. So then for the number of lots, for thistles, I think it's pretty clear that it would just be 1 lot because she just comes up and it's just this little point. So now I accidentally did that. So if we were to imagine the 10 feet on either side of us that is included in our survey area, we get these gray lines. But I'll go back to this because this is more like what we would be estimating with to actually do this in the field. So thistles looks to me sort of like 1 lot. Ashy sunflower, I would say 1 or 2. I guess I'll call it 2. The goldenrod, it's spread across most of the area, but not all. There's definitely some places without it. So I would say that's somewhere in the 15 to 20. And I guess I'll call it 15. But if I had said 17 or something, that's no problem at all because it's in the same ballpark and that's what we're looking for. The white clover is kind of similarly spread, so I'll put that at a similar rank or a similar number of lots. It looks a little bit less distributed to me, like there look like a couple lots that it's not in and the goldenrod is in. So I will give that maybe 15. And then, yeah, so 2 lots for the ashy sunflower, 1 for the thistles. and then 15 to 20 for the goldenrod and white clover. And then now, to help you guys visualize it, I did actually draw out these grid lines. So your survey area, as Sam was sort of mentioning, is just 10 feet around you anywhere, because farther than 10 feet away, chances are you won't be able to see a bumblebee. So that 10 feet on either side looks like this. So remember, the black line is where you walk, and then the gray line, everything in that box is included in your survey area. So then to actually see what the lots would look like is something like this. But again, nobody should be making these diagrams. This is just so I can express to you all what I mean by dividing your survey area into 25 lots. So yeah, if we were actually to count this data with this diagram and get the exact correct values, this is what we get. So as you can see, goldenrod, I didn't say 18, I said 16, I think, but that's no problem at all. Really, the important things is just it's in the ballpark. And I think that for the really high ranked plants, it is pretty easy to generally say, oh, there was the most goldenrod of any of the flowers. This example, it's honestly, I think, a little bit trickier to say goldenrod is more abundant than the sunflower and the thistles than in real life, because generally in real life, I'll see one big flowering tree or something that totally crushes everything else. So then it easily will get the top rank. And then the rankings, as you get to the little onesie twosie flowers that you just see a couple of, you can just have a lot of ties. And we understand that it is an estimation and it's not totally exact. So yeah, I hope that this doesn't overwhelm people more, but this is sort of walking through the floral ranking and number of lots concepts. But it is really pretty simple. It is just a rough estimation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So one thing I kind of want to emphasize is that floral rank is not based on the number of lots. Some people like to say, like, oh, clover is in 20 out of 25 lots, so that's the number one rank. But even though it can be distributed and across most of your survey, a big tree like this will still outrank these small flowers because there's just so much bloom area. Another note that I want to make based on this big tree is that this 10 feet around you, your survey area, should also be vertical. So while you're walking, it's almost like you're in a bubble surrounded by 10 feet on all directions. And anything outside of that 10-foot bubble is not within your survey area. Because if you think about it and you're standing by this tree over kind of by the bushes, you won't be able to see bees that are at the top of the tree or over here. So as much as it can be tempting to include all of these flowers in your floral rank, because it just looks like, wow, that's number one rank, that's a lot of flowers, you have to remember not all of them are actually within your survey area. Okay, so now that we got through kind of how to survey, and I have a big FAQ section and a bunch of time for questions at the end, so if you're feeling uncertain about anything, don't worry, there's still time. But I'm gonna quickly show our results from our pilot year. So as Sam was saying, we developed the survey last year, and by the time we finished like perfecting our protocol and everything, it was already June. So we don't have any data from the spring of last year, it's mostly fall. And we only got 97 surveys because it was 12 collectors. It was mostly people in the bee lab. I think probably about 60 or 70 of those 97 surveys were just between Sam and I. So this is definitely not data that any conclusions should be drawn off of. It is completely just a pilot year to figure out this survey so that you all can go and collect a bunch more data and we can have some real data that should be useful for land management purposes and, you know, a bunch of things. So we had 97 surveys. It was across 6 states and Washington, D.C. It was in 11 counties, most of which were in Maryland or Virginia. 12 collectors, but as I was saying, Sam and I did the most of these surveys. It was over 5 months, June through October. And even just in this small number of surveys, we saw 445 plant taxa and 8 bumblebee species. These are the bees that we saw. Am I in the way of this? I don't know. So these species are generally kind of, found in Maryland and Virginia. So if you're in other places of the country, you may not recognize these species. But I think a lot of us are used to seeing a lot of impatiens. We saw, 1,400 just in these 97 surveys. And as you can see, also, we have a lot of just bombus species and sex unknown. So it is totally great to have data even without the ability to identify things to sex and species. We are so happy to just get, it's a bumblebee. And I really feel confident that all of you know what bumblebees look like. So yeah, I'll just leave this up for a second, but you can see we had a lot of impatiens, which is the most common one in our area. And we did get a few more or less common ones, but yeah, nothing too surprising here. And I will move on. And this is our actual bumblebee and plant data. So this is the plants that we saw bumblebees visiting. We have this bee score, which if anybody wants more information about, I would be happy to share how we calculated that. But we just basically looked at how many bumblebees visited, and we corrected a little bit for the floral rank to see if they were just, to make sure that we're not just seeing bees always visiting the most abundant plant. We have to correct for how much of each flower there is. So I was pretty surprised to see cup plant at the top of the list. I think not too many people, definitely some people, but it's not the most common bumblebee plant, and not so many people are even familiar with it. I think that mountain mint and bergamot were not so surprising. Definitely are some great bumblebee plants that I would feel confident recommending planting for bumblebees, even, without significant data, because mountain mint, it's really honestly fun to see sometimes. It'll just be, Sam calls it BTV, because you'll just see bumblebees swarming the entire surface. One kind of interesting thing here is that the common dandelion, which is sometimes referred to as a bumblebee plant, had a very low score. So that was probably one bee visiting or something like that. It was really not a top choice. I'll leave this up for one more second and then move on. Okay, and here are some plants that we saw no visitation in these 97 surveys. And I want to again reiterate that it is pilot data. So if we had hundreds of people across the country watching these flowers, chances are we would see some visitation to these. But it is interesting that in 97 half-hour surveys, we didn't see a single visit to these flowers, because some of them are, also considered okay plants, like Queen Anne's lace or fleabane. I kind of was anticipating to see maybe a little visitation, but nothing at all. So now that we're done with our pilot year and we are spreading the survey across the Northeast US, so currently our target range is the Northeast US, which is generally Maine to West Virginia, but we are totally happy to collect data from across the country and even Canada, because we're hoping to expand to include those regions. So we will hopefully get to that data after we finish analyzing the Northeast. So yeah, if you're outside of the Northeast, don't be discouraged. We still would love to get your data, but we do have to prioritize the Northeast for right now. And then additionally, we really want to collaborate with just as many groups as possible. So we have had a lot of people very kindly share the survey with their Master Gardener and Master Naturalist groups. So if anybody is in one of those and you don't think your group knows about it, I would really appreciate you sharing the survey. And also students. I think there's a lot of young people who would really enjoy the survey, and it is pretty accessible for young people, especially if you have some assistance from adults. I think really young kids could just do the bee observation, and it's a really great way to just show them that it does matter what you plant. And even though they're generalist bees, they're not going to visit every flower. They do have specific flowers that they prefer, which I think a lot of kids don't even notice. So yeah, we just really want to expand and keep collaborating with as many people as possible. Once we actually get this data, what are we looking to do with it? So we want to improve planting guides because we were mentioning before, a lot of these planting guides are not totally accurate. They'll recommend flowers that we don't actually see bumblebees visit a ton, or there might be some flowers that are not recommended and are actually really great. So we want to improve those guides. And we can also compare if the floral preference varies in different situations, which would be interesting to see. So if you want to get involved, you can send me an email at bumblebeecount@gmail.com, and I'll set you up with a folder in our Google Drive to submit data. And now, thanks to Denise, you can download the forms from our OSU website, and you could just email me the data if you want, or you could download the forms there and email me to get set up with a Google Drive folder. And here's a little screenshot of the website, and you can see if you hover over the survey, it gives you this drop-down menu and forms. If you hover over, they will appear right here. And you just click those to download the PDFs. Okay, so now we are into our FAQ. And then after this, we'll have time for just people to ask questions. So here is our form. People are sometimes a little bit confused with how to actually record bee species on this form. And before anybody gets a little intimidated, if you don't want to identify bees to species, you would use this form. So this one's a little bit simpler. You would just write the plants over here, and then you just tally any bees that you see here, and you do your floral estimations here. But if you do want to do bee species, we have this box up here for you to record the species names. You can see Bombus unknown is always the 6th. So if I saw a bumblebee and I didn't know what it was, let's say I had white clover as my flower number 1, I would tally this Bombus unknown in 6 and sex unknown. So if I saw Bombus impatiens, I could write Bombus impatiens in species 1. Let's say it's a female, I would tally under 1 under females, because this 1 corresponds to species 1 where I wrote Bombus impatiens. It's pretty intuitive. Okay, this is another question. Can I survey my yard every day or anywhere? Could you repeat a survey area? Absolutely. We are totally happy to take data that is repeated in the same location. We also, if you don't feel like doing the same area, feel free to do a new location every time. We don't care how many times each location is surveyed. So it's completely up to you. Some people have been a little bit confused with the data upload process on Google Drive. So I have some screenshots of that process here. So I start with my camera roll, and I have an iPhone. So if you have an Android, it'll be a little bit different. But I just, in my camera roll, will select all of my flower photos and my picture of my data sheet. And then I will hit this little, I don't actually know what that button means. I guess share. And then, so that button brings up this screen. And then here I can just hit the Google Drive icon. And then hitting the Google Drive icon takes you here. It takes you here. And then you select My Drive. And then you pick your the folder that you want it to be in, and everybody's folder is named with their first and last name. So you would just search in your drive. I do Jenan El-Hifnawi. My folder pops up. I click on it, and then it brings me to this screen. Sorry, it's out of order. And then I hit upload. So I have the rest of this. So once I'm in my folder for Jenan El-Hifnawi, I hit make a new folder for each individual survey, and I name it with the location name and date. So I make a new folder for this location and date. I hit create, and then I hit save here. And that's it. So if you don't want to use Google Drive, you could also just totally email the folders. But the Google Drive app is super handy for data uploads, and I definitely recommend it. Another question that has come up is Bumblebee Lookalikes. So some people are wondering, is that actually a bumblebee or not? And for that, I would recommend going to our Quizlet, which I have the link and under here, or you could just search Droege and Quizlet, And there is a set for bumblebee species identification, and it includes some lookalikes. Generally, there's not too many lookalikes, but there are a couple to be aware of. So I do think that's worth giving a look. Another question we get is, can I survey with a friend? And that, absolutely. I normally will drag my friends along on surveys, and I just will generally kind of have them walk with me as I survey. Or there's some other options, because you can't have two people survey the same exact area at the same time, because then we would be repeating data. But there are some ways around that. You can either do what I do and just have people walk with you. I like to, I'll bring a friend to walk my dog while I survey. And then another option is you could both do surveys, and if you're walking on a trail or something, you could have one person do the left side and the other person do the right side. So you can talk and walk, but you're not actually looking at the same area. Or you could work together and have one person record all the notes, and you both can look for bees. But as Sam mentioned, we do also kind of appreciate that this data gives us bumblebee counts, which is why we like to keep the surveys to 30 minutes of bee observation time, so that the count of bees is actually meaningful, because we know the amount of effort that went into finding that many bees. Having two people look in one survey does throw that off a little bit. So just note if you did this on the data sheet, so that your data can be included for floral preference purposes, but not for bee count purposes. Is the survey kid friendly? Absolutely. This is one thing I really like about the survey, is I think it is such an amazing way for kids to get outside more and to learn their flowers. I did not know any of my flowers, even though I've lived in Maryland my entire life. I didn't know any of my wildflowers until I started doing this survey. And it's crazy how quick you just learn everything, because you have to learn, you need every single plant species name to complete your survey. So all of a sudden, I just know my wildflowers now. And I think that would be really great for a lot of kids to do. So I think above the age of around 12, obviously it's going to vary person to person. A 12-year-old could probably do the survey themselves. I think the trickiest parts for kids are generally the floral rank and number of lots. So if you wanted to have a really young kid, like a kindergartner or something, get outside and look for bees, you could have an adult go with them, which you should probably not send a kindergartner alone anyway, I suppose. But you can have an adult come with them, and the adult can do the floral rank and the number of lots. And the kids can just look for bees, which is the very fun part anyway, so they should have some fun. This is another interesting point. What if you're interrupted in the middle of a survey? Do you have to just throw it out, or can you finish the survey at another time? You actually can take a break in the middle of a survey, as long as you continue the survey on the same day in the same general location. But that's a really, really nice opportunity that, if you're walking and something happens, it starts raining or something comes up, you can totally just stop and finish another time, which is really helps with the flexibility. We get this one a lot. What if I see a bumblebee flying, but it doesn't land on any flowers? It doesn't count for us. We only care about floral preference, so we can't record them at all. They don't exist. But it can be sad when you see, especially recently when there's so many queens out looking for nesting sites and things. It would be fun to count them all, but unfortunately, if it's not on a flower, it doesn't count. So what if you aren't sure about your flower IDs, but you don't want to use Seek? It is okay to actually not write flower IDs on the forms. You could write something like small yellow flower, little white flower, and we have an expert botanist review all of the IDs, whether or not the flowers are identified. So everything will be identified in the end, even if you don't do it yourself. So if you really don't like to use Seek, I know some people have sort of been struggling. It can glitch occasionally. It works pretty well for me, but some people don't like Seek. So this is a great option if you don't want to use it. So back to that point, Seek is really not working for some people, and I think that there's a little bit of a learning curve. So one thing that really makes the biggest difference is Seek it's a camera, and you should just show the camera the plant rather than actually taking a photo right when you see it, because it takes a while for Seek to actually figure out what the plant is. And the more different angles and distances and different plant parts that you show, the better a chance it has of identifying it. So I'll generally scan a plant until it gets me to genus or species, and it gets almost all of my flowers to genus or species. There have just been a couple examples that it is to family. But if you're just getting like dicot every time, you should give Seek a little bit more time and show some more angles rather than actually taking that photo. Another thing is that it'll crash generally if you take a ton of photos in a row. So I will use my camera app for all my photos of plants that I do know. So rather than using Seek, which can be a little bit cumbersome for, white clover, I'll just take a picture of that. But if I do actually need to identify a plant, I'll use Seek. So this is another one that has been coming up. What if you don't have a smartphone? It's actually totally fine, despite our requirements saying that you need a phone. But as long as you have a camera and you can access the internet to either upload data in Google Drive or you could email the photos, you can totally participate. We only use Seek for the identifications, but as the previous question showed, you don't actually need to identify every flower. So if you know all your plant IDs, it's really no issue at all. Just take photos of the plants, write the plant species. If you don't know your IDs, just do what we just said, take pictures of the plants and write small white flower so that we can at least keep everything straight on the data sheet. I do want to emphasize again, though, that we need photos of all the flowers, whether or not you can identify them, because we have a botanist verify all the IDs. So make sure you're getting those photos and they are actually okay pictures so that the botanist will be able to make out the important features. Okay, that's everything that we had. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead.
So Jenan, we have lots of questions, and you answered lots of them. I really like the FAQ part. So I had a question about Latin. Do you prefer Latin names? Because there's so much confusion with common. So when you're talking about filling out the data sheet, and I apologize if you already said this, just wondered if you want the Latin on there.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. If you know your Latin names, Latin is slightly preferable because, yeah, as you're saying, there is a lot of plants with the same common names and things, but we totally expect common names because, at least personally, I don't know my Latin names. And when I do a survey and I have a list of 20 Latin names and I'm trying to remember which flower is which to estimate the abundance and distribution, it gets a little tricky for me. So I just do common names personally, but if you know your Latin names, that is totally good. So I guess to answer your question, either one is fine.
Okay, awesome. And Sam's been typing away, answering
a
lot of the questions. And so, Sam, if you want to chime in too with some of those FAQs that have come in the chat box, let's look here at our questions online. So, and I'm sorry if you already answered some of these, Jenan, because I was trying to keep up and write a bit, and so it's hard for me to listen carefully. So Sean asks, if I do a survey and don't observe any bumblebees, should I still log that?
Yes. So we do encourage people to only start a survey when you see bees in this current time, because it's kind of with this, as Sam was saying, the hiatus. I've been doing a bunch of surveys that I'm expecting bees and then I just end up getting none. So we'll still take that negative data if you've already done the work. But because we're interested in the floral preference, it's not actually super useful for our analysis because no bees are picking any flowers. But if you've done it, we'll totally take it because it could be useful at some point, but there's no need to go out and do a survey if you're not expecting to see bees.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm all ready to go, but I'm not seeing any workers and I haven't seen many queens. So I'm on the cusp. I'm ready to get out there and observe some bees as soon as the girls are ready. Laura will be traveling around the East Coast this summer and wants to survey different areas every day or so. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, thank you. That sounds great.
Okay. You already addressed this, but Anne is worried because she doesn't have a smartphone.
Yeah, as long as you can take photos with something, and you can email me those pictures. That's all we need. So you could totally still participate.
Okay. Sean wanted to confirm our parameters. One, it needs to be sunny to mostly sunny, over 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and before 5 p.m.
Yeah. So we do, really the parameters are just are bees there. So we just put those because that is generally when bees are there. But if you happen to see bees in conditions other than those, feel free to survey. But yeah, it's probably not worth your time to go out and hunt for bees on a really cold, cloudy day or at 6 p.m. or something. So those are generally good boundaries.
Okay, because he said because of his schedule, he can't do that. But if he sees bees, he could try to do a survey. And,
totally.
Okay, super. Oh, so a couple people asked this question. Does this survey tie in with Bumblebee Watch, Bumblebee Atlas, iNaturalist, et cetera? There was another question, why are you doing this? I think you kind of answered that, but why are there these other Bumblebee surveys? Why are you duplicating anything?
Right. So we don't, we're not connected to those programs. And yeah, that is a good point that there's a lot of Bumblebee work out there, but I think that we kind of differ from those in that we're really focused on the floral preference, and those are more general Bumblebee biology. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I'll just point out that if you take a picture of a bumblebee on your survey, we're actually not interested in that, but you can submit that picture to Bumblebee Watch and iNaturalist, and that's useful. And the flowers that you take pictures of can also be submitted to iNaturalist as a secondary thing, but we're not officially in cahoots with any of them, but we support their work. They just have a different MO than what Jenan's program does.
Awesome.
Well said.
So a couple people asked, how do you tell a queen from a worker?
So currently, if you're really far north, it might still just be queens out. I am not great at identifying queens and females, and sex is not, I haven't mastered that yet, but generally the queens are really large is what I keep an eye out for. Sam, do you think there's anything worth queens versus workers? Just size?
We're not keeping track again.
But how do people identify?
It's just size. That's the problem.
Okay, yeah, size. It really is the main thing to look for.
Okay, and I didn't go back to my data sheet on the other screen, so there's not, and I think I heard Sam say, you're not wanting us to designate whether it's a queen or a worker. We're just saying a female, male, or unknown.
Right, and we have, we kind of will base if it's a queen or a worker based on the seasonality because the queens come out first. And I did say based on size, but to be more specific, queens are generally, at least at the beginning of the season, they're really big and almost Carpenter Bee size, while workers are more like a honeybee size or a little bigger than that, but it's way smaller than a Carpenter Bee.
Okay, great. Let's see, I froze up for a second. So there we go. Okay, so okay, Sean has another question. If we survey the same area routinely, do you want us to submit images of each flower species with each survey or only new species?
We do want flower photos for every survey that you do. If you really don't want to take pictures every time and 100% it is the same plant, you could use your old photos, but we do need the photos submitted with every survey.
Okay. So Teresa asked, how do you list seeing a bumblebee on the collection sheet if the bumblebee is just scouting for a nest?
Unfortunately, we can't.
You
could, if you want to write it in the corner for fun, I look at that. I smile, but yeah, it doesn't go into our data.
Okay. And I think, Sam, is this true, or Jenan, you may know, is Queen Quest still kind of homeless and not quite up yet? Because that's a thought too. If you see a queen out, you could submit that data to Queen Quest.
I'll give this one to Sam.
So I believe, unless Queen Quest has evolved, that they are only interested in queens that you find that are overwintering. Literally, you're digging them out of the ground.
Gotcha. So not just active queens. Okay. Okay, Michael asks, if the same bee comes back to the same plant, do you count it twice?
No. It's hard sometimes with the observational surveys to tell if it's the same bee or a new bee, but if you see it go up and land again, it only counted one time.
Okay.
And related to that, some people ask, what do you do if you see a bee on one flower and then move to another flower? But interestingly, bees will tend to pick one flower to visit for a whole day. So that situation really rarely arises. I think I've only seen it happen once in all of my surveys.
Marlene asks, if I'm just doing my home wildflower garden, can I just say it's one lot?
So this is where the number of lots is, that's not exactly how it works. Every survey is 25 lots. So you would have to divide your backyard into 25 lots.
In your mind.
In your mind, right. So the lots, if you have a small area, the lots are just smaller, but every single survey is 25 lots. And I also want to emphasize that some people will get really into the lots and they'll start to think of the entire survey in terms of lots, but it really is kind of an afterthought, and it just is for floral distribution. You shouldn't be considering lots in any other sort of way of the survey. Sometimes people will record a flower every time it appears in a new lot, which is not what we're looking for at all. So sorry if that confused people more.
Okay. So I think you answered this, but just to clarify, Peg said, so is each lot 20 feet wide?
So this is, the lots thing is the most confusing thing to people. Really, what we're trying to get at is the number of places and the area that flowers cover, right? But it's too difficult to actually come up with an actual measurement of that. So what you would do is essentially in a sort of a talk through it kind of way is you do your survey and then you reflect back that if you were to actually divide up that walk that you just took into 25 sections, roughly how many of them had white clover, had the one blooming, which would be one lot, crabapple, or the scattered buttercups, and don't obsess about like, oh, I have to mark out. It's not a mark it out thing. I have to tell you, like, if we will give you a special present if you can give us a good way to explain this to people. We just want to know from ranking roughly who is the most common in terms of flower area, right? You can't compare a tiny little baby flower. Actually, there's no really baby flowers, but a little tiny flower and a giant sunflower. They're both one, although sunflowers obviously are multiples in that one. So we use ranking just to look at the amount of flowers available, because that's important to bumblebees. Like one single tiny flower of one plant is obviously going to affect the number of bumblebees on that plant than an entire field of plants. So we need a way to give us a sense of measuring that's at least somewhat quantitative, but not overly complicated. And it turns out that even if we could do a super accurate measurement somehow of all that, it really doesn't yield any better results than there's a lot of this flower, there's a little of this flower. We're trying to give you a way to frame what we mean by a lot or a little in two different ways, rank and number of areas. Does that make sense? But if someone can explain that better,
one explanation
reward
that, right?
A t-shirt contest. Somebody wants a really cool bee t-shirt if they explain it really well and share that.
I would like that. One thing that I kind of like is to think about it in comparison to percent coverage. So we're looking for sort of the same thing, and it's how much, how distributed is it? But percent coverage, you would also care how much of each lot is covered in a flower, where we don't care how much of the lot is covered. We just want to know, is a flower present in each lot? I don't know if what is helpful and what is more confusing. So yes, let's just do this t-shirt contest.
We'll do that. So if you can just reiterate, because a couple of the questions are, how often do we survey and where can I survey my same garden? And I know you've answered that, but if you could just say it again.
Right. Yeah. So it is completely up to you. As hard as it is to believe, you could survey as much as you want. You could literally survey all day, every day if you want to, which please do. Or you could do one survey and quit forever, which please don't. But yeah, you could survey wherever you want, as many times as you want, whenever. It's really open-ended.
Okay. Sue wonders if her photograph has to capture the bee as well, or just the flower.
That is a great question that I should have emphasized more. We don't need photos of the bees. We only need photos of the flowers because we need to verify floral identification. But we're going to trust that everybody can do the bee identification because we have faith in you that you know bumblebees versus others, and just don't do the species unless you are really confident about it. So yeah, it is completely, I forgot what I was about to say.
Well, that's okay, because Maggie has a question about old willows with very high branches. So what do you do with those trees that she knows bumbles are up there, but can't figure out how to see them? What should she do?
Yeah, unless it's within 10 feet of you, we just can't count them. So I don't know, unless you had a ladder or something, I think they're just not in your survey area, unfortunately.
Okay. Let's see, there's a question about how do I tell the bumblebees from the carpenters? And I just wanted to let you know, I'm going to pull the Quizlet address again, just a second, and put it in the chat box. But I did add the Quizlet link to our website. And so actually, when you go there, Sam has several Quizlets. You can do Bumblebee versus Carpenter Bee. You can do Bumblebee ID. And these are really cool, especially if you're like into the gaming idea of learning. They're really fun. Here, let me put the Quizlet in there. And so these are ID quizzes. There you go. So how do we tell those? What is it about the butts, Jenan? Tell us about butts.
Right. So Carpenter bees have huge black shiny butts. They're bumblebees. A lot of the ones in my area, at least, also have black butts, but they are fully furry. Where Carpenter bees, it's really shiny. There's a little bit of hair at the very top of the abdomen, but it's essentially looks completely hairless. And they also have slightly different flight patterns, which it's hard to explain. You more just have to kind of get out there and watch them for a while. But Carpenter bees do fly pretty differently. So if you see them from afar, that's kind of the easier way to identify that.
Okay. Oh, we're almost right at the top of the hour. Sam, do you have questions that you answered on the chat that were frequently asked that would help if we clarify in our a minute or two remaining? Folks, if you have to jump off on the hour, thank you so much for coming. I'll record until we're done here, and so you can go back to the recording. We will post the chat. We will post the Q&A section, and that FAQ section will grow and grow on the website. So please ask your questions either now or email Jenan later, and we'll be sure to share all those good questions and answers. And let's see, I saw Sam pop over. Sam, did you have?
We were just doing a lot of wrestling with figuring out the lots thing. Some were like, I can do a quadrat, but not 25. So for example, if you're a quadrat person, just do it think of it in your mind as 6 quadrats, right, across the thing. And don't obsess on it. We certainly don't want anyone measuring anything or stepping it out or that kind of thing. You have roughly 10 feet on either side. When you finish your walk, which allows you to wander wherever you want, oh, looks like good bumblebees over there, go there. That's the cool thing about the thing. Afterwards, though, we want to know something about what the abundance of those flowers were. So that's the trick. There's the abundance of total flower mass. That's the ranking. And we're not even asking you to quantify. We figure you can't really quantify that. But we can say these have the most flowers out there and these have the least. And then we want to know how much of that whole walk was covered by that flower? Were they all in one patch or everywhere? So thus the tricky lot thing. So think of like how many people in a suburban area the suburban area has 25 lots, right? How many have a Jaguar? Like 1. And how many have a Toyota? 7, that kind of thing. I don't even know. I'm just like throwing darts here on that one. And yes, as many surveys as you want is good. So I do my house whenever I'm there during the day. And it's a good day. Here at the lab, the same kind of thing. So flowers are changing, bumblebees are changing. So that kind of repetition is good. And additionally, going to places with weird flowers, we didn't talk about that, but if a flower is never recorded on a survey, then we actually don't have information on that. So if you have a special area, or you like, oh, this flower is really good, but it's somewhere else, go to that flower and let's check it out. You know, basically we're saying prove it by doing a survey.
Great. I'm just going to share our website again, just so you can see it if you can, and we're on there live. So here's the Quizlet I've added in. There's lots more information about Bumbles that you can click on. Here's our whole Bumblebee short course. So lots of webinars and papers and other resources on there. Questions, if you have questions for Jenan, how to become a participant, or just email your questions. And then as we get the document together with the FAQs, we'll post that. The survey, so all your forms are here. And the pilot data that Jenan and Sam talked about, the demo survey example is on here. This black poster is on that. So if you want to get others to participate, you can share that, print that out. Here's Bumblebee versus Carpenter Bee, other resources. And I'm just going to click on that because trying to remember, Sam, if we have just those shiny, that's that shiny hiney right there. And we've got
I like
butts.
that one, Denise.
That's Olivia Carroll's shiny hiney or a fuzzy butt. And so I describe it as layers of piled carpet. That's the bumblebee, right? So they can be different colors, but it's always going to be that hairy hind end, whereas the shiny hiney is the Carpenter bee.
Yeah. And Carpenter bees, there was a question. Carpenter bees are the size of queen bumblebees. They're big and they don't really vary. Whereas bumblebees often can be quite small, and certain times of the year when resources are dwindling, you can get bumblebees that are almost the size of a honeybee. Mostly they're obviously bigger.
I did put in the chat box, those of you from Ohio, I think we've got a lot of folks from Ohio, if you haven't hopped off already. If you'd like to sign up, I'm going to organize an Ohio team so we can figure out our lot questions and maybe meet up and do some bee surveys and learn together, maybe do some webinars. So I have a little sign up there if you want to click if you're from Ohio, and I'll get in touch with everybody. So there was a question, Sam and Jenan, about will people who are in different will people who are in different states be able to get the data for that state? So know what's in Massachusetts versus somebody from Delaware, et cetera.
Yes. And also, so for example, in Ohio, we can run reports for just the Ohio results, for example, and also for people who might be associated with a large arboretum or garden, and they can make, I think we call them projects. Is that right, Jenan? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we can make any area that someone wishes to do multiples or have a band of people do that as a project area. And then afterwards, we can do a report for that arboretum, that garden, whatever. But also all the data, we'll just have it as gigantic, hopefully gigantic, Excel spreadsheets, and we'll give it away. So it'll all be publicly available and probably available for download right on this website too. I don't know if we're going to do fancy schmancy, tools, but we certainly will have a report and poke at these data in lots of different ways. We actually have a report from last year that's an example of how that might be approached. Is that up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it's the link is right here under the survey.
You can take a look and then just imagine that if we actually had a lot more data, what that might look like. So this is just an example, and there's many different ways. That's the science, right? Here's a bunch of data. You can analyze it in a whole bunch of different kinds of ways than, or just use information that we present in tables.
I will mention too that you can subscribe to the website, and that way when Jenan or Sam has a post, so an update or a question a lot of people are having, you'll get that as an email. You can subscribe right there on the website, or there's a subscribe button. So a way for all of us to keep in touch about this. And guys, so thank you so much. I know a lot of folks have to hop off. You've got other things going, or the sun is out and your garden is calling. The bumblebees are calling. Many, many thanks to Jenan and Sam for the overview for this great project to get us all really out there excited about bumbles. And guys, I don't know if you have time to keep answering questions. I'm kind of on your schedule. So if you want to take some more and people want to listen, and we'll keep recording.
I'll go back to the chat. Can I still enter into the chat?
Yeah, you sure can. Mm-hmm.
I'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and Denise for putting this together. This is so exciting for me that people here to hear me talk.
Yeah, I think we had 600 some at the peak, so it's great.
Wow.
Great turnout. And Jeanette, if you want to answer some more, I'll just keep looking here. Catherine wondered if you're trying to capture like the succession of bloom through the season.
Yeah, it's not something that we explicitly, mention, but totally, I think that it is something that the survey would capture and is really interesting to see, and would help make sure that land managers actually provide resources throughout the entire active season rather than just part of it and leave them to starve.
Great. Carol says that she knows flowers and local bumbles. So I want to go out on a walk with Carol because I love somebody who's like, oh, I know that flower. I know that one. Can she use a normal digital camera and upload from her desktop computer? Hates using the phone because it's hard to hold.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That was easy. You are accepting data from Canada. Is that right?
We are.
Okay, so Maggie, you can go ahead and submit your data from Canada. Some of these were from a little while ago, webinar-wise, so some of them have been answered. Do you need to ID down to species for the flowers? And you don't. You can even say it's a little white flower and just put a picture of it.
I see this one that just popped up.
Good, awesome.
If you have a lot of bumblebees on a plant, should you just estimate the number or actually count them? And yeah, I think that what I've generally done is I'll just count a bunch and say kind of like 50 plus or something. I definitely wouldn't spend time identifying all of them. I would identify maybe 3 to 5 to get a general idea of the species that are present. But yeah, estimation is good.
There are a couple goldenrod questions. So if folks can identify goldenrod to species, again, I want to go for a walk with you in the field this fall. But if they can ID goldenrod to species, should they, or is just a genus okay?
Yeah,
or just
totally.
Goldenrod is fine.
Species IDs, whenever possible, are totally great. We actually have a special note about goldenrod in particular because it has some interesting identification features that you need to see, like, I forget exactly what it is, but I think like the base of the plant and under a leaf or something. So if you can do species level IDs, that's great. We also ask for some specific photos of plant parts, which it says what parts you need on the data sheet. So you'll have that out in the field.
Okay, great. Scott's wondering why you chose Seek, which is part of iNaturalist, instead of just iNaturalist.
Yeah, that is a good question. Should have been in the FAQ. iNaturalist is great and generally more accurate, I think, because you actually have real people. But Seek is just instant because it is only the AI. So Seek will either give you an identification on the spot or it will not be able to identify it for you, where iNaturalist, you would kind of have to wait for the community to respond, which would just really bog down the data entry.
And you have to be connected to the internet.
Oh, yeah. And Seek, you don't need any Wi-Fi or data, surprisingly. So you could do it anywhere.
Okay. Someone mentioned Picture This. I forget if that was in the chat somewhere. Picture This as an ID app. You have to pay for it. I think it's $30 or more a year, but it is really excellent. So if you're looking for an app that can help you, enhance your ID skills, you may want to look at Picture This. And sometimes I compare Picture This to Seek to see what they're both telling me.
That's very interesting.
Nancy wonders if flowering weeds if flowering weeds in a lawn count.
Totally. Yeah. And that is a good point as well. We want any blooming thing whether or not it's native or intentional. Anything that has a flower should count, and you should take a picture of it.
Scott says your main geographical area is Northeast. Can you be more specific? And you may have, again, sorry if you already said that.
I can't quite remember the list of states, but so it's Maine to West Virginia. It kind of ends up being West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Connecticut, Rhode Island, that sort of the real. I if you were to look on a map, just draw a line from West Virginia, and it's everything above there.
Michelle Gonzalez has a question that, or an approach that I'm going to use as well. So she says, I have access to Penn State's native flower trials where we monitor different types of insects. Could I use that area to monitor the bees? And so we're actually doing a different pollinator study here in Ohio, comparing some native perennials to some introduced perennials. And we all have them in plots in 15 different sites across the state. And so I'm going to use one of our plots to also, first I'll do my pollinator monitoring, and then I'll also do the bumblebee monitoring. So, we know these plants are great for pollinators. I hope to see some great bumbles on there too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So Michelle, you're in. Yes. And the answer is yes. Lisa wonders about your Western boundaries. Maybe you just said that. You said,
West Virginia to like diagonal. So I wish I included a map.
Okay.
What is it's Fish and Wildlife Service Region 5, if that means anything to anyone.
Okay. This is a good a question for both of you. Someone is looking for, and I'm sorry if I zip past the question, so I forget your name, but here, Jackie wants to know a good source to purchase nets and vials for collections.
Sam.
That's a problem. So,
BioQuip just closed.
Yeah, so the standard place where we all got our equipment is closed, and I don't have a good answer right now.
But Sam, I think I heard, maybe somebody knows and can put that in the chat. I heard that it was coming back. Somebody had bought it, and does anybody know that? Maybe that's a rumor by those of us who wish.
There was a rumor several months ago that would happen, but as far as I know, it's closed.
Okay.
There are, so the problem is that other places sell these, like you can go on Amazon, but a lot of them are just total junk, I have to say. So I don't have any recommendations, but there are people working on that, but mostly I've seen that as lists that people keep on their own. And so I'm sorry, I can't really give you great advice right now.
Great, thanks, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Sorry, just scrolling too. And Jenan, if you see any that you want to take, or Sam, if you have any others. So Kate wonders if there's a way to fill out the survey on phones rather than on physical paper. And my guess is physical paper is the way you want to go. I mentioned our Ohio survey, and we're doing the same thing. Just having that paper backup is so important. You lose your connection, you're halfway through the survey, whatever, the phone dies. And so is that accurate as well, Jenan? You're really looking for that paper. Where can I find that list of Bumblebee's favorite flowers? And maybe you were looking from my my screen share. Let me go back here and see if I can share. I do have that resource. Sam, tell us about that resource, because isn't that Jared
So
Fowler's?
Did you guys mention this?
The Flower Finder? No.
Yeah, Flower Finder. Oh gosh,
It's on the website. So Bumblebee Flower Finder.
Yeah. So
let me see if I can share my screen here.
So the Flower Finder is going to be informed by all our results, but people want to do things now, particularly for bumblebees. So the Bumblebee Flower Finder has what are just people's experiential expertise on what plants are good bumblebee plants, and it lets you divide up the your query, like, oh, I only want things that are tall. I only want things that bloom in the spring, or I only want plants that are purple, and gives you a presentation of that. Now, how good they are and whether there's some questionable things on there or whether there's things that we don't have, I don't know, but you can't really go wrong if you're emphasizing these plants for bumblebees, because it is based on sort of an understanding of the commonest of the bumblebee plants. So it's something to play around with and to use as a guide now, and we're already modifying it in terms of what is included and what's not included. And but we have to wait for your guys' results.
Get out there and monitor.
For example, on the top there was a thing that said Robin's plantain, and I have never really seen anything on that. It changes every time you reload. So there'll be questions about whether that's how good a plant is. Some of those some of those early composites versus other things. So this is where we're finding out, but this is something that people find useful right now.
Okay. So Diana asked, so I'm trying to go with some of our just later in the webinar questions to see if we have some that haven't been answered. So Diana wonders, is it okay just to enter the plant name if we know it well without using Seek for every single species?
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you take a photo so that we can verify the ID. But yeah, if you know the flower, I would recommend not using Seek because it does tend to be a little bit slower than your just plain camera app or a camera.
So Jean has a great suggestion, Jenan. This maybe is something for us to put our heads together on. She's looking for an editable PDF of the data entry form. And so people could have it on their computer and just enter their information. Let's see, how would they, then just send you a screenshot or send you a.
That would be great. And we have had a couple people make up some Excel spreadsheets, like recreate the thing in Excel. So maybe we could kind of adapt one of those, but that's a great idea. And I will follow up with you about that.
Okay, we got lots of these are good. Oh, so I'll just go back here to our website. So that Bumblebee Plant Finder or Flower Finder is under Learn there. And there are the Quizlets too. Let's take another minute or two. No, lots of folks have hopped off, but it's great to be together and be able to ask you guys these questions here.
Let me mention, can I mention something, Denise?
Yeah.
So a number of times in the chat, it's come up like, oh, what about pictures of these bees? And I think there's a sense that we actually want pictures of the bumblebees, and actually we don't. If you have like an off hand, like, oh, hey, I saw this cool thing, you can send it to us. But we really are asking you to only identify and count bumblebees visually. But we want pictures of the flowers because it's really more of a flower-based survey. And we have to be confident of the identification of the flower. Not that we don't trust you, but we don't. And so we'll verify that. And then the bumblebees, a lot of times will just be bumblebee species, because even with a picture, we can't tell. The problem with pictures is that nobody can get pictures of all the bumblebees on that survey because they fly away, or they're too far, or it's the little fuzzy dot, or your camera is not set up to do that. So, and you spend too much time trying to do that. So we don't want any pictures where you're just looking at flowers and saying, oh, there's a bumblebee on it, and then trying to see if you can tell it what species, if you know those things, and then you continue on your survey. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. But they can take those pictures and add them to iNaturalist or,
yes, yeah,
for
it's
others.
a secondary thing. We really are completely de-emphasizing so even, yes, you can send them iNaturalist. Our suggestion is do your flower survey first, then go back and take bumblebee pictures as much as you want. Otherwise you're trying to, what we found is if you keep adding too many distractions, like, oh, why don't you count monarchs, or why don't you count the other bees, or what about beetles? It dilutes the main point. And so we need to be
successful, be focused, just do this now, and then go on to something else. I get it. Gail wonders what the time frame is for the survey, and I'm guessing Gail means when to start, which is now, but when to finish. So November-ish, or as long as there are bees flying.
Yeah, as long as there are bees out. For me, it was mid-October that I stopped seeing anything, and yeah, I think from at least in Maryland, it was the first start out in kind of April-ish, maybe a couple in March, but it depends obviously a little bit where you are.
A couple questions about males versus females, how to tell them apart. And we can make sure we have linked to something. I think there's some nice diagrams that kind of show you some of those characteristics. And another question, like when would you see males more in late summer, fall?
I will also, I think, defer to Sam for this. But at least personally, I just look at the pollen collecting, I think it's the scopa on their legs. If males don't collect pollen, so you won't see the pollen baskets on the hind legs of males. So if I see pollen, I'll put it as a female. Otherwise, I just do sex unknown personally. But Sam, are there any features that are useful for male versus female in the field other than the pollen baskets?
It's really subtle. And so a lot of them were just going to be unknown gender, but with some, first of all, in the spring, it's all females. They might be queen or worker. And then at some point, the males start getting produced by the colony, and that can be fairly early. So end of June, even if you're in the southern areas. But the males tend to be a little skinnier. They're not carrying anything. They tend to be a little bit longer. They have an extra set of abdominal segments. Their antennae tend to be a little bit longer. And as Jenan pointed out, they don't have the pollen basket. They certainly don't carry pollen. So if it's carrying pollen, it is a female. If it's just the leg, it could be a female not carrying pollen, or it could be a male. And if you can see it, you can look to see whether that corbicula, it's called, so the bare, shiny, flat area, which the bumblebee gathers and sticks its pollen, separates the females from the males, with a very, we'll just do a little sidebar that says there are a few bees that are nest parasites. They show up very rarely, and because of nest parasites, the females also don't have a corbicula. So we're not going to concentrate on that. So a lot of times you would, particularly at the remainder of the year, have to put gender unknown, because you have to get kind of close to see these characters. And a lot of times they're just going to fly away anyway, or you have to climb into the middle of brambles or something.
Okay, Laura had, just to reconfirm, so is there a requirement on the amount of area to cover in a survey?
So there is not really, except that it has to be large enough that it takes you 30 minutes to cover without you just walking in circles and repeating the whole area. So generally, I think a backyard alone, the average backyard might be a little bit small. So then I recommend, if you can, include any of your neighbors' front yards or something, or you can just walk on a grassy area that has some white clover or something, but it should take you 30 minutes to cover. There is no actual area measurement, though. We just kind of, your area is relatively limited by the time, but no, there is no technical area.
Okay, and you said clover, so she wonders, we're looking at native and non-native plants, weeds and desirables, any flower?
Exactly, any flower.
And then Canada's okay for gathering data?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Awesome. So the recorded session, Sally and everyone will be here at our website. So again, let's somebody pop that into the chat, a lot of you to the chat box. You'll also go there as you leave. So this webinar will send you to our Ask a Bumblebee website, but we'll post the recording. I should have it up by 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon if the tech gods are smiling, so you can come back and watch that. I might separate out the training part and the Q&A, and then all of it together. So if you can kind of choose how much you want to go back through, and then keep asking questions so we can really build that FAQ and help all of us, turn into Jenan and Sam really meaningful data on what bumbles are visiting. So again, thanks so much, Jenan and Sam. Really appreciate all of your time and expertise on this. And
thank you.
Looking forward to going out there and looking at bees. Thanks everybody for coming and for hanging out an extra half an hour to go over some of those questions. And I think it's time to go out and walk around the yard.
Yes, time to survey. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
It was great.
Thanks a lot, Denise, for doing this.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for all you do. Really appreciate it.